Okay, it is 5:30, and I will call to order the regularly scheduled Shawnee Mission School District Board of Education meeting. The first item on our agenda is the Pledge of Allegiance. Please rise.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The next item on our agenda is the adoption of the agenda. I'll seek a motion.
So move, Goodburn.
Thank you, Ms. Goodburn. Is there a second?
Second, Hembry.
Thank you, Ms. Hembry. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
The next item on our agenda is public comment. We hold public comment from 5:30 to 6 o'clock. Members of the public are welcome to come and speak to the board. We do not have any members of the public who have come to speak with us, but we do have the time blocked off from 5:30 to 6. So we will recess until 6 o'clock when we will return and begin again with item 2.2, which is the Superintendent Report. Thank you. All right, at 6 o'clock, we'll come back together and turn it over to Dr. Fulton for the Superintendent Report.
Okay, thank you very much. It's great to see everybody. Thanks for coming out this evening. I want to start off, first of all, by saying how tremendously proud we are to honor two Shawnee Mission School District Kansas Teacher of the Year honorees. Natalie Johnson-Berry, who is an English language arts teacher at Shawnee Mission North, is a Region 3 finalist for the 2022 Kansas Teacher of the Year Award. And this honor was announced in a virtual ceremony on March 28th. Those ceremonies are hosted by the Kansas Department of Education, and we thank them for all their work on this. She is eligible to be named Kansas Teacher of the Year, and that will be announced at a ceremony in September. Each year, every district in Kansas is able to nominate one secondary and one elementary teacher. Crystal Brower, a kindergarten teacher at Shawnee Elementary and SMSD Elementary Teacher of the Year, was honored for her outstanding work as an educator during that March ceremony. So we want to send out our congratulations to these educators. Shawnee Mission District and community are tremendously proud of both of you. Aisha Bowser, who's an 8th grader at Indian Hills Middle School, is going to compete in the Scripps National Spelling Bee. She was declared the state spelling bee champion in late March in a competition with 74 students from across Kansas. This incredibly talented speller is also the 2-time reigning champion of the Johnson County Spelling Bee. And so we're going to look forward to rooting for Aisha in the National Spelling Bee, which will be held this summer. Congratulations to her. Also this past week, or previous week, 2 Shawnee Mission students will be honored for their accomplishments in computing and technology. Lindsay Chu, who is a senior at Shawnee Mission South High School and an engineering signature student, and Hannah Poe, a Shawnee Mission South junior, are recipients of the National Center for Women in Information Technology Award for Aspirations in Computing. And they're being acknowledged in a virtual award ceremony later this week for their outstanding aptitude and interest in technology and computing, leadership ability, academic history, and plans for post-secondary education. So congratulations to both of these women for their wonderful accomplishments. We have a student at Shawnee Mission East, Andrew Ward. He is a junior at East, and he has scored a perfect 36 composite score on his ACT exam. Fewer than 0.1% of test takers achieved this distinction, and we congratulate Andrew on this outstanding accomplishment. Hannah Nell Bourneville, a senior at Shawnee Mission North High School, has been named a 2021 Koch Scholar. She is among 150 high school seniors who will receive a $20,000 college scholarship. Fewer than 0.16% of applicants to this scholarship are chosen to receive this competitive award. And so we want to congratulate her on this prestigious honor. Great job. You can tell our kids are working hard, and being rewarded for that hard work. The Kansas Department of Education has presented a certificate appreciation to the Shawnee Mission School District in recognition of, quote, heroic efforts since March 2020, ensuring that Kansas students receive healthy and safe meals during the 2019 pandemic. The certificate, which was signed by Commissioner Randy Watson, along with the Deputy Commissioner and the Director of Child Nutrition and Wellness, states that KSDE, quote, applauds your leadership, tireless dedication, perseverance, and commitment to help keep Kansas kids healthy and ready to learn, end quote. We thank everyone, especially in our food service department, for all they've done to make sure that our students have received the nutrition that they need throughout this year. Later in the meeting, we're going to hear from our food service department about those heroic efforts, and so we're glad they're here this evening. This week, nationally, marks the Week of the Young Child across the country. We want to take a moment to celebrate all early childhood educators, students, families, and everyone who support services that meet the needs of young children. We also want to acknowledge the important role early learning plays in providing a foundation for success for all of our students. This is great timing as kindergarten kickoff events begin to be held in our elementary schools. Of course, enrollment is open for kindergarten and pre-K in our district. We'll include a link in the board recap for everyone to find information about enrolling in these programs and other early childhood offerings in the Shawnee Mission School District. As a reminder, it's not too late to share student projects and work in this year's Research and Development Forum, otherwise known as the R&D Forum. Students and teachers are invited to submit student-centered created projects, experiments, or artwork to share in this year's digital district-wide R&D Forum. We'll include a link for submitting student work in the board recap. The deadline to submit work to the showcase is Friday, April 6, 2021. The SMSD R&D Forum is one of the district's biggest showcases of the year. May 1st is the 59th year of the forum, which will include a virtual student showcase and a live-streamed pitched finals competition called The Next Great Idea. This competition is presented in partnership with community partners at Startland. Participants will be competing for cash awards to help make their dreams a reality. And we're going to invite our community to view the student showcase and watch and vote in the Next Great Idea pitch competition on May 1st. Links to watch will be posted on smsd.org and on Twitter and Facebook. The entire R&D Forum is made possible through a generous support of the Rainier family, and we thank them for their long-standing support of this district-wide event. And then finally, the Shawnee Mission Education Foundation invites you to a special event celebrating the accomplishments of our 2021 seniors, and that is the Distinguished Leader Speaker Series, Senior Portraits. That series will feature seniors in their own words, inspiring us with stories of strength, hope, resilience, and advice for younger students. Our community is invited to join the virtual audience for the Distinguished Leader Speaker Series, which is a free virtual event at 6:30 p.m. on Thursday, April 29th, 2021. Viewers can also watch on demand, and we'll include a link to make a reservation in the recap. So lots of great news from the district, and we're so proud of all of our students and staff for the great work that they're doing. That concludes my report.
Thank you. And now we get to move to item 3.1, which is the update from the Food Service Department, and I know we are all looking forward to this presentation. And congratulations on the award from KSDE.
So I believe we're going to start off with Dr. Christy Ziegler, and she will be introducing her team members.
Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity for us to report out this evening. There we go. We have prepared a brief presentation overview of the annual food service evaluation to share this evening. As you know, this has been a most unique year in many aspects, including our food service. We are grateful for the outstanding work of our food service team members who have met every challenge that the past year has brought. They've done so by meeting those challenges head-on with excellence in every way that we have served our students and our community. This evening, Nancy Kokenauer, Director of Food Services, is with us to provide the program update. We also have a special guest with us who we will be introducing in a few minutes. So at this time, I'd like to invite Nancy to share the presentation with you.
Okay. Good evening. Thank you for having me. I want to start out with our food service employees are the true heroes. We have started serving meals the day after we came back from spring break in March 2020, and we have not stopped. I have to just stress that. We have pivoted every single time the district has changed the learning plans. We pivoted, we've changed, and we've embraced what we needed to do to feed the kids. So we started in March, we continued nonstop until August the 19th. We took a few weeks off, and then we started again on September the 8th, and we have again not stopped. We continue to feed kids in person, and we also feed them on Fridays in the remote setting for the pick up and go meals, and that will continue through the end of the school year. One of the challenges that we have faced this year has been food. You all probably have gone to the grocery store looking for a product and can't find it. That is my world on a daily basis. And you might find that product, but they may only have one item. Well, one case of anything will not even come close to doing what we need to do in this district. So it has been truly a monumental task to find and procure food since March of last year. And it's not something I say lightly. It has been a challenge, but it's what all of us are facing because manufacturers are just not producing the food that we need. They've had their COVID challenges as well. They've had to reorganize how they've done some of those production lines. So it goes back to everybody's got to work together, and we just have to be adaptable to change. One thing we have noticed is manufacturers are reducing the number of items that they produce. For example, our students absolutely love stuffed crust pizza from Schwann's. Absolutely. Schwann stopped making it. I thought it was a temporary thing, and they came out recently and said it's a permanent fix. They won't give me any answers, so we had to pivot again to find another pizza that we could just even find pizza, because when you take one product like that out of the market, all of those of us that are purchasing that have got to find another product, which then affects that product line and how much is produced. So, pleased to say we found another product that we have fallen in love with another vendor that will be on our plates for the kids this fall, which will be a stuffed crust pizza. So we're very happy. But it's not something that you can just do overnight. Another thing, in all my years, I have never learned this, and I was just very amazed, and you might not realize this, we buy our milk from Highlands Dairy. They're local, they're just downtown Kansas City. They have to know 2 weeks prior to when we're going to take a delivery of how much milk we want, because they contact the farmer and say, we need this many gallons or truckloads of raw milk for Shawnee Mission Schools. So it's that fresh milk. So every time we pivot, we have to then adjust how much milk, and we think how much milk we're going to need for the next 2 weeks. So those have been just a few of our challenges since March. And honestly, I don't see it changing for the near future. Breakfast and lunch participation, as you would expect, last year plummeted because we closed schools. The numbers of meals that we served from March through August are reflected in the next slide when we talk about summer meals, but for right now, those are the actual meals served when kids are actually in class. You'll also see for this year, February of 2021, we're down 835,811 lunches as compared to the year prior. And that's just because we don't have all of our kids in class. You know, some of them are remote and some of them are doing pick up and go meals. So it's just the numbers game is what it is. Free and reduced, we've also seen a reduction in that this year. We're not getting as many applications from families this year. We attribute it because USDA has given us the approval to serve all meals at no cost. So there's really not an impetus for families to apply because they're going to get their meals anyway for free. Many have asked, what does next year look like? I would like to know that myself. USDA has said they will give us guidance in April. Well, April to me was April 1st. And I don't know when it's going to come, but that's the guidance we've been given as far as will meals be for free next year or not. They're supposed to provide that. They'll provide, will we need to do applications, what kind of meal pattern we'll have to follow. All those things, we're waiting for the feds to come out with that guidance. So as soon as I know, I of course will share that information. After-school snack and meals program is greatly reduced this year. I truly believe it's because of the buildings and all the challenges that they're facing. You know, from staffing to coordinating schedules to kids in buildings and not in buildings. I had an administrator reach out to me about a week before spring break and said, I finally have a teacher that agreed to help me with this program. And, you know, I can understand. And this person was very concerned, but of course I said, yes, we'll do it whenever you want to start. And this person had 6 kids. So we're feeding 6 kids at this particular building in an after-school program. So we continue to work with anybody that wants to contact us, and we'll start the program at their convenience for sure. Summer meals, that is the amazing thing. As you can see, from March until August, we served 303,290 meals. That kind of blew the roof off everything. And because USDA approved us to serve meals, we did it in 4 pick-up and go sites. You might have participated with us. Our plans for summer for this year, we've posted on our website. We made it live today. We will have 4 sites again for pick-up and go meals, Comanche, East Antioch, Rose Hill, and Shawnee. I needed to work around some of the construction that's happening in some of our buildings this year. So we're going to be at those 4 sites. We will distribute meals on Mondays and Thursdays. We will provide on Monday a hot entree and provide them with 3 days worth of food, breakfast and lunch. Thursday we'll provide a hot entree as well and 4 days worth of food. So we're going to cover the full 7-day spectrum for them. And we start that on Thursday, June 3rd. And we will go through the last of July. And this program is available to any child ages 1 to 18. They do not have to be a district student. So if people have grandkids visiting for the summer or whatever, we would welcome them to come pick up meals for those kids. We will also be providing hot lunches for those students in Summer Enrichment and Summer Academy, which are our district summer school program. So we'll be offering hot meals every day for those programs. Last but not least, our financials. As you know, over the years, we've always maintained a 3-month operating fund. And that was, thank goodness we did. Because last spring we had to tap into that. When the district made the decision to close and we wanted to pay all of our employees, we had the funds in food service to pay the employees to stay home, which was wonderful. What we have found this year is our a la carte revenue is greatly reduced. And primarily that's because we just don't have kids in the buildings. So we're down $1 million in a la carte revenue. We do anticipate the federal government has been dangling this carrot for emergency funding for food service for several months. We're hearing now it should come in July, and from my calculations, we should get about $492,000. We won't have the final numbers until they send us the documents, but that's our financials. I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. I'll turn to board members to see if we want to go ahead and ask some questions. I'll start with Ms. Borkman and we can work our way around.
Thank you. Ms. Kokenauer, thank you so much for all you've done.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the thank you is enough.
Thank my staff. When you see them, I'd really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
If you're in the buildings, just go say thank you.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, duly noted.
Yeah.
I know in the longer report that's in board docs, you talk about your, the food service department. Currently, we have 210 employees. We're typically at 265. Are we trying to get back up to that 265
Yes,
number?
absolutely.
Okay.
We made the decision, we had a lot of people that chose to retire or resign when COVID hit. They just didn't feel comfortable, which was truly their right. Made the decision to not hire right away because we weren't sure what our learning plans were. You know, were we even going to have kids in the buildings? And we were doing perfectly fine up until we brought everybody back, which was 2 weeks ago, basically. We started posting jobs, I want to say, about a month ago, and I've hired about 5 people. But I will tell you, the candidate pool, they're just not there. I have sent information out, and we've put it in parent newsletters, letting them know that we are hiring, because that is usually a great wealth of knowledge. But then we'll continue to hit it hard as we go through the summer and into fall.
So primarily, we target SMSD, which has worked in the
Yes,
past.
it has worked great because
Sure.
those moms that are having their kids go to school, they want to work.
Sure.
I should say our dads, I apologize
Yeah,
for
yeah,
that.
yeah.
Parents, when their kids go to school, they only want to work when the kids are in school, and I'm the perfect place to come work for that.
Mm-hmm.
And then they get full benefits.
Yeah. Have we thought about other ways of trying to encourage people to apply? Is that
We've
phase
tried,
2?
we've tried, but unfortunately, everybody's got a help wanted sign out there.
Sure.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you.
Reverend Guy?
I was able to participate in the summer meals program last summer a couple of different times, and it was a lot of fun. It's so wonderful to see the kids and see the families come through. But you needed a lot of volunteers to help run that program. I assume you will also need
Yes,
volunteers.
yes.
Is there a place, or do you know when people can sign up to be part of that, or how that will work?
We'll have information out the first part of May with the sign up ready to go.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mr. Stratton?
Thank you for the report. I have no questions. Thank you.
Dr. Sinclair?
Thank you. I'm still just blown away by the, 28,000 to 300,000 meals. That's just a phenomenal response to being able to meet that need. So again, thank you. I wanted to ask a question about the fresh fruit and vegetable program. One of the elementary schools I worked with through the MVP program participated in that. Is that something that rotates around from elementary school, or some years they do? How does that participation?
That's a federal grant that is allocated to KSDE, and they send it out to us as school districts. We then apply, and Shelby, Rebecca, and I work together on the project because we have the nurses help us with that program because they provide the nutrition education for the food that we're providing to the classrooms. And so we submit applications for those schools, and it's only elementary based. There's no middles or highs allowed. In the past, it has been awarded by KSDE based on the highest free and reduced percentage schools across the state. And so we apply for more than we think we're ever going to get, and then we just wait to see what we're going to have. And so, yes, it does vary, but it just depends on how much money the state's going to get and how many other districts choose to apply or not apply.
It's a phenomenal program. It was
It
fun
is
to see
very good.
that
And we have
action.
found that some of my managers, of course, live in the communities where they have the students that they work with. And so they'll see them in the grocery store. And there's fun stories that I've heard my managers say, that they'll see a student from their classroom and say, "Mom, buy this. I've had this. It's really good." So expanding their horizons, I think, is great. And we're still waiting, because that's still part of that USDA push that's coming in April, to find out if they'll have the program next year, and then how many we can apply for and whatnot.
Okay.
So,
Thank
yeah.
you.
Thank you so much for everything. I will definitely thank your staff if I see them. Looking forward to this summer's program. One of the things that happened last summer was there was folks who were asking questions as to why they had received a cucumber or a tomato in their lunch. And then that was kind of circulating on social media that like a child had gone to get lunch and then had come home with a cucumber. And we had discussed it, and what had happened was that there was produce left over, and rather than dispose of the produce, it was provided on the tables for when they came to pick up their lunch. If they wanted to also take a tomato or a cucumber, they were able to do that. And so I'm only mentioning this now so that you can nod and acknowledge
Right.
that is something that happens.
Exactly.
Because
Yes.
if someone participates in the program this summer and they go to get their lunch and they find that their child's brought home the milk carton and what else is in the package that they get when they get like a protein
Yes,
a
they get-
dairy, a carb,
And a fruit and a
vegetable.
veg, right,
If they also have a random tomato
yes.
or a cucumber, that is not part of the program itself. It's just
Right.
that we are not wasting any of
Right.
the produce at the end of the year.
I don't anticipate having to do that this year, because remember last year in March, we shut the buildings down.
Yes, so we
And I had
had,
no other way to, and like you said, I wasn't going to throw it in the trash.
right, no, I'm just wanting to, if that is not the case, if there
Right.
aren't any random cucumbers, that works out too.
Right.
If that image floats across somebody's social media feed.
Yeah, that
that's what
was an
was
interesting
related to.
feed, yes.
Yes, thank you.
If that were to happen, that may be the production of our school gardens that
Oh.
are coming forward.
Well, in the Broadmoor Bistro, they use all of their stuff, so that might.
There you go.
Yeah, thank you. Ms. Goodburn?
Yes, thank you for this report. I appreciate it. I just wanted to turn to Dr. Fulton. Talk about the financial impact of this, because it looks like to me last year, which we knew about, was about $1.5 million deficit, and this year it sounds like maybe about $1 million deficit that we're looking at already for this coming year. So can you talk about the budgeting process, what we do there?
I can, and actually, I'm going to turn that question over to Dr. Atha and his team to address it, because it absolutely does have a financial impact that we're responsible to address. Dr. Atha?
It does, and we're putting information together now, and as you probably know, at our May 17th board meeting, Mr. Knapp will be conducting a budget workshop like he does every year, and he'll be able to address specific questions regarding this at that time. And Nancy alluded to early on, there's a grant out there that we're hopeful in getting that should fill the gap. If we get that at 490, roughly
492.
492,000, so that'll help fill the gap. But we'll have more specific information for you at your May board meeting.
So basically, we have to absorb this.
Yes.
Yeah, unless we find money for it, like the grant or whatever, we have to absorb this, but maybe, like, I remember last year, there was different cost savings that we had during the year, so it was kind of able to offset it. I don't know whether we've had to, I'll wait till May 17th.
Well, and it also goes back to, the quality job that Nancy has done through the years to be able to build up those balances in food service. And sometimes we're criticized because we carried X amount of dollars in balances. I think it was like $3 million that we carried in balances. But a lot of our food is purchased now before we start collecting money. So it's important that we do maintain those balances. And Nancy and her team has done a great job of that. And she's really sold that to her staff, that they really believe it's important to identify our kids that are on free lunch, and they work very hard to identify the maximum number of kids that qualify for that. And of course, our at-risk dollars spin off of that as well.
I appreciate the info. Thank you again for the report.
Just to tag on to that, I talked to Russell Knapp about a week ago and said, what are your projections? He's hoping we're going to break even. And part of that goes back to your question about staffing. And that's one of the reasons I chose not to hire in the fall, because I didn't need those employees. So we're saving the labor costs and the benefit costs of 50-some employees. We were also able to offset some costs this fall when I didn't need them in the kitchens. The district allowed me to have the food service employees work if they wanted to, and they helped as custodian helpers. And we could offset those costs off to the custodian department.
So by not hiring those positions and trying to be conservative there, that dollars that was budgeted to pay those salaries falls out of the budget. But also, and as we mentioned to you previously, our food service folks, we've tried to optimize their hours, and they've worked across over into with our custodians and helping in the cleaning and sanitization of our buildings as well.
I want to jump in here real quick in regards to the slide on free and reduced lunch with the reduction there. And I know there will likely be an impact to our state funding as a result of free and reduced lunch numbers reducing. However, at the federal level, we did get permission. So typically when we complete our federal programming for funding in regards to free and reduced lunch, we use a year behind. So for 21-22, we would typically be using 2021 data from September 20th. We have received permission that for our 21-22 LCP application that we'll be able to use our 19-20 numbers. So I think for federal programming, our funds shouldn't reduce as a result of free and reduced lunch. And then hopefully we would be able to rebound and completely skip the 2021 year, and in that next year be able to use the 21-22. So that should help a little bit, but I do think we'll see an impact on state funding.
Well, and the real answer here is getting back to some semblance of normalcy, to where we're serving meals to kids each and every day, breakfast and lunch, and our a la carte menu, and so on and so forth. You agree, Nancy?
Mhm. Absolutely.
Is it my turn now?
Yes,
I'm
Ms.
sorry.
McCree.
I was going to ask just about nutrition. One of the most common questions I get, I actually had a fifth grade student from Prairie call me and ask how we decide what to put in the lunches. So not just the number served, but the content and quality of school meals. I know it's
It's
big
federally regulated. It
jumble.
tells us what we have to put in there, and then we take it a step further. And so like on a protein source, we will go out, not this year, of course, but previous years, and we'll sample foods across the district with kids. Whether it's a pizza or whatever the item is, and we get them to tell us, do you like it better than what we've got or whatever? And so that's how we get our baseline of what we buy. So it's kind of a three-tiered process. We look at cost, we look at student acceptability, and we look at the nutritionals, because the nutritionals must meet certain requirements.
And we have a nutritionist on staff that helps with all of
Yes,
the kind of nutrition.
And I'm a dietitian, and so the two of us work together on all that.
Wonderful.
Yep.
I'm happy to volunteer some stuffed crust pizza tasters for my family. That's been a hot topic in my home, so I get.
I know,
ideas to
of
bring
all
home.
things for Schwans to drop, but it's what it is.
Are there any further questions, or we all had our bite at the apple?
Well, I want to first of all say,
Yeah.
I want to say thank you for the opportunity of serving in this role as director. As you know, I'm exiting in June for retirement, and I want to introduce Grace Liss. I asked her to come. Today was her first day as the new director of food service, so I've got a couple of months of overlap to get her up to speed.
Thank you. Welcome to the team. We're happy to have you, and Nancy, you will be missed.
Thank you.
Before we conclude, and Nancy, you did a really amazing job of transitioning there, but I would be remiss if I didn't make a few comments, if I may, about Nancy's leadership. I love tonight that she used the word pivot and adapt to the challenge. That's been my word this year, so we've shared that. There have been many times where I've heard the word pivot screaming in my head, and it has been a graceful transition every time that word has come up. So Nancy's very humble and very talented, and she will always recognize her team and their accomplishments before herself. And so, Nancy, I'm going to take a moment to share, as your retirement comes, and this is likely your last board meeting with us in reporting. I want to share a few comments that are about the leadership and legacy that you have built here in Shawnee Mission. So I reached out to a few of Nancy's colleagues statewide, as well as some of the team that she has assembled here in our food services department in Shawnee Mission. And I've just put together a quick summary of what they have shared. Nancy, you've spoken highly of our state director, and so Cheryl Johnson has shared the following. Nancy is a champion for healthy school meals and creating healthier school environments. Due to Nancy's vision and proactive leadership, Shawnee Mission was one of the first school districts in the nation to receive a Healthier U.S. School Challenge Award, an award that fewer than 1% of the schools in the entire country have achieved. Nancy has been an advocate for access to healthy meals for Kansas children, not only when school is in session, but also, as we saw this evening, when school is not in session. Through Nancy's vision, she has worked to establish partnerships and collaborations in our community, such as increasing sustainability through composting and recycling, which has made a very positive impact on the environment as a model program, and it did impact our students as they saw the responsibility that they had in serving the community. Nancy's outstanding administrative skills, including her knowledge of federal child nutrition programs and procurement regulations have resulted in Shawnee Mission Food Services continually implementing programs of excellence on all of our reviews. The Kansas State Department of Education appreciates and applauds Nancy's leadership, tremendous efforts, and tireless dedication to fuel students with safe and healthy meals and impact student success. And we don't stop there. Nancy, next, I asked some of your team members. You've built an amazing team over your time here, and here's some key themes that emerged. I'll just summarize the themes. Nancy has been the heart and soul of the food service department and has impacted all of us in such positive ways. She consistently shows a level of caring and concern for all employees that is unsurpassed. She understands we all have different talents and works with us to develop them. We have many employees that started with us as food assistants in our kitchens that moved into kitchen managers, supervisors, and other roles in supporting our staff across the district. She understands what needs to be done and can see how everything will fall into place when done in the right order. With everything that has happened in the last year, we have never worried that there wouldn't be a plan in place before it was needed. Nancy's very easy to work with. She always lays out her expectations in a clear, concise manner, trains and supports her staff, gave us the tools to be successful in our jobs, and got us through the stress of all the changes that the pandemic brought by laughing with us and reminding us we can do this. And finally, Nancy sees the potential in all employees and helps us succeed. She cares about the health and wellness of the students while leading the department with this in mind. Our child nutrition state director made a comment about Nancy at a wellness workshop a few years ago. I think this is legendary status when this happens. She gave a comparison to the Olympics and said that Nancy is in front, carrying the torch and leading all districts in wellness. Nancy is one of a kind and will definitely be missed. Nancy, we thank you for your dedication in carrying the torch, leading through your many years of service, not just in Shawnee Mission, but developing the field of practice in child nutrition, as well as service to the Shawnee Mission School District. We're grateful for your tireless efforts in supporting nutrition and wellness for our students, our staff, and our community. You will be missed. Thank you. This concludes our food service report. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that wonderful report. And Nancy, you will absolutely be missed, but we also look forward to the program continuing to do great work for kids. You know, it's hard to focus on learning when you're hungry, right? So it does matter. It's difficult to imagine that a little over a year ago, we all faced something that none of us had encountered, and that was a pandemic. And here we are a little over a year later. Hope is on the horizon. Vaccines are starting to occur in a robust way, including recent announcements that we're working on getting them to children, which is going to be critical. So we're glad about that. But we know this pandemic has taken an academic and emotional toll on students. It has taken a toll on all of us, globally, nationally, locally. And there's going to be a recovery period. And so what we're sharing with you tonight is our plan as part of that recovery period that we're going to experience, as will arguably school districts throughout America and really throughout the world as they begin to rebound from the pandemic. It's really important to underscore that the additional resources that we have received from the federal government, are receiving from the federal government, or those with the third round of money that we anticipate receiving from the federal government, is not extra. It's foundational to our ability to meet the needs of all of our learners. It's not money to be supplanted with existing money. It's not something to be played with. And this money is critical to making a difference for all of our children. And tonight, you're going to have an opportunity to get an idea of the extensive planning that's been done by lots of team members to start to address the needs of all of our learners. And so I want to turn things over at this point to Dr. Hubbard, who really, along with Dr. Atha, have journeyed this report through to you and have done a wonderful job in working with their teams. And it's the work of a whole lot of people absolutely focused on meeting the needs of all learners. So Dr. Hubbard, it's all yours.
Thank you, Dr. Fulton. I just want to start by thanking the people behind this report. As you all have seen for the last couple of weeks, it's very extensive. There were a lot of time and effort put into this report in a really difficult time. I mean, we asked teachers to come after school in a very difficult time, counselors, social workers, just a large variety of stakeholders from our buildings. When they were already tired. And so I want to thank those people that participated, including the team leaders, Dr. Gilhouse, Dr. Dennis, Sherry Dumoulin, and Dr. Neal, all of which spent hours and hours and hours. And then even behind those team leaders, there were additional leaders that you're going to see at the table tonight, Dr. McKinney, Krista Carson, who's stepping in for Dr. Neal tonight, so we're thankful for that. But just lots of effort into this report. And so we gave them this challenge to obviously keep the strategic plan at the forefront, which, the mission is absolutely number one for us. And then those three objectives, we want to make sure that we're staying true to the strategic plan, stay the course. It's still very important in our work, and that we know there are going to be some gaps. In addition to that, we have an accreditation system that we have to be accountable for, which fortunately for us, very much marries to our strategic plan. But these goal areas, both in relationships and responsive cultures, and then the third is just around responsive culture. But in all of those goals, you're going to see things that are mirrored in this plan. You're going to see things around academics, all parts of academics. You're going to see things around student behaviors, discipline, absenteeism, all of those areas that we address as well. And then obviously the social emotional piece and that responsive culture in those goals. And so we really challenge them to stay true to the strategic plan, the accreditation process, and then the youth outcome driven accountability that we are, which is another standard that we have to meet as a school district. So I think they've done a really nice job with that. And you're going to see that throughout the plan. You're going to see a true alignment to those areas. Ready. And so with that, those teams worked tirelessly. And I want to also include, even though they're not included in those specific goals, air quality and sanitation is so very important as part of this plan as well, because we need facilities open and healthy for all individuals to meet all of those goals in the accreditation and strategic planning process. So Judd and Tyler will be joining us tonight to really bring this whole report together in a package. And with that, I'm going to toss the ball to Dan, and he's going to talk about some of the data that we looked at as these teams really started to develop this plan.
Thank you, Dr. Turned on. Thank you, Dr. Hubbard. We're going to start with a bit of a roadmap, so you have a little preamble to the data that we were going to see, so you have a little bit of a head start on the types of summaries that we're going to look at. So thank you for allowing me to share some data that connects with our current realities related to the pandemic, as well as considerations for continuing to move forward with our strategic plan initiatives. We have several data elements to cover, all of which highlight many of the outcomes that we'll be following to measure our progress from a strategic planning perspective. Most of our baseline data comes from the 18-19 school year. At the same time, as Dr. Hubbard mentioned, we'll need to monitor our outcomes as we recover from the effects of the pandemic as well. So there's a couple different aspects in here. I'm going to do my best to cover some of the notable highlights that are also covered in the more detailed report. As you might know, I could talk for hours on just a few of these items in here, so I'll go quickly through some of the highlights. First, we're going to review some trend data on student attendance rates and chronic absenteeism. We'll start with defining how attendance rate and chronic absenteeism are calculated prior to moving on to those slides, because there are some critical differences in there. Then we'll take a brief look at course grade distribution trends at the middle and high school levels. You'll see how the distributions of A's and B's and F's from semester 1 of this year compares with the previous 2 years. We'll take a slightly deeper look into students who received one or more course failure, and we'll finish that set of slides with a logistic regression table showing the relationship between a variety of potential predictors that affect the likelihood for course failures. So we'll take a little bit of look at the why, where some of the connections. Following that data set, we'll take a brief overview of our NWA map results from the winter term. If you remember several weeks ago, you saw a presentation on the NWA map data using the fall term snapshots, and at that time, we had talked about looking at some of the winter data. Then Dr. McKinney will share some highlights from the Panorama survey on social emotional learning, and then we'll close the data presentation with some updates on the new discipline matrix. So looking quickly at some of the attendance information, of course, as you know, at the elementary levels, teachers take attendance twice per day, morning and afternoon, so students are either absent for half a day or for the full day. At the secondary level, teachers take attendance once per class period, so depending on the day, there's between 4 and 8 periods in which they're taking attendance. So when a student misses a class period, that represents, for the elementary level, they're either missing a half or a whole day. At the secondary level, they might miss 1/8 of a day or 1/4 of the day, depending on how many class periods are in that day. There are 2 common ways to summarize attendance. One is attendance rate, which is the total days attended divided by the total days enrolled across all students in the population. So as you can see in the attendance rate example, days attended can include fractional days. You can imagine then that 180 days times 27,000 students is an incredibly large denominator as well. So keeping that in mind when you're thinking about attendance rate. When you get to the next slide, you'll see that attendance rate is not very sensitive to year-to-year changes in attendance behaviors, but it is a metric that does appear in public reports such as the building report cards that KSDE puts out. The second calculation on the right, you see that example is that's used to summarize attendance is chronic absenteeism. A student is identified as chronically absent when their individual attendance rate is below 90%. So as an example here, over the course of a semester, let's say they're 90 days in the semester, if they miss more than 9 days, they're chronically absent. Okay, so you're looking at the percent of students with that yes/no flag, and you'll see that chronic absenteeism is a better metric, I would say, for highlighting trends and differences between student groups. So if we move forward then to attendance rate. I captured cumulative attendance rates after the first 4 weeks, first 9 weeks, first 15 weeks, and then at the end of the semester 1. You can see some gradual decline in these attendance rates, but overall attendance rates are very high. Historically, attendance rates from prior years are somewhere between 93 and 95%. So if we were just looking at attendance rate, this year would look unremarkably normal. If we take the same snapshots as before, so I took the first 4 weeks, the first 9 weeks, the first 15 weeks, and then the end of semester 1. And in this particular graph, you see the right-hand bar in each group. The right-hand bar is the level of chronic absenteeism from the 18-19 school year. So you have a point of reference there. Let's see here, I lost my place. So among all students, 16.1% of students were chronically absent during the first semester of this year. So we could say 16.1% of students had more than 9 absences, assuming they're enrolled for all 90 days, right? And then for comparison, that 12% is that historical chronic absenteeism rate. So you can also see that chronic absenteeism is substantially higher in several of the identified student groups. So as you look at, for example, Black, Hispanic, free and reduced, students with disabilities, and ELL. So there's certainly an areas for us to look at there. If we look at chronic absenteeism from a different perspective, this graph compares students with the label of in-person learning with students who are in the remote learning mode. And if you remember, in-person students at the elementary level, they've been in person for most of the year. In-person students at the secondary level have been in a hybrid mode for much of the school year. Overall, if you just look at the all students graph, the chronic absenteeism looks the same between your in-person and remote groups. However, there are some clear differences across grade level ranges. For younger students, chronic absenteeism was a little bit higher for in-person learners. For the older students, the chronic absenteeism level was higher for remote learners. And we can speculate on a wide variety of reasons for this. For example, in-person has some different meaning at the elementary and secondary level, like we talked about. If you remember, secondary in-person, or at the secondary level in the hybrid mode, about 50 to 60% of the days were actually remote days. So some things that can affect absenteeism. Well, quarantine can affect in-person attendance more than if a student's already remote, they would not likely be in some kind of quarantine. And then, of course, at the remote, at the secondary level, especially if a student's working remotely, it's very easy to decide just not to hit that join button or to sleep in, or maybe if there's some the student has some technology issues and they fail to connect with the teacher to get their attendance counted or something like that. So there's a wide variety of reasons that we could speculate that might be involved in that. If we proceed into the course grades, the next group of graphs shows the distribution of course grades for middle and high school students. At this level, students will typically receive 7 or 8 course grades, because that's the number of course periods they're enrolled in at the end of each term. In this case, we're looking at the end of semester 1 for high school students. When we look at middle school grades, we're talking about quarter 2 grades at that point. So the graph that we're looking at now for high school students shows grade distributions across all grades. We're not talking percent of students here, we're talking about all grades. So there's about 54,000, 55,000 grades in this data set. In historical years, 69% of all high school first semester course grades are an A or a B among all course grades. And 5% of all course grades are an F. For this school year, we had 64% of all course grades that were A's and B's, which still represents a lot of successful students. But unfortunately, 11% of all course grades were an F this time around. So the frequency of Fs has doubled. On the right-hand graph, you can see the overall, what I would say, the GPA across all grades for each student school year. So if you imagine an A is worth 4 points, a B is worth 3. That's really the unweighted grade point average, if you want to see it from that perspective as well. So in either case, you can see how it compares with the previous 2 years and versus the current year for semester 1. This paragraph shows similar data for middle school students. Each semester, there are about 26,000 quarter 2 grades across all students and all courses. Historically, 76 to 77% of all middle school grades are A's and B's. This year, that number is 67% of all grades are A's and B's. The percentage of F's at the middle school has historically been around 5%. This year, that percent of F's was at 15%. And again, you can see that overall change in the grade point average across those 26,000 grades as well. So just a couple different perspectives on the grade trends. In this graph, we shift our focus to just the percentage of students. So denominator changes here, percent of students who had 1 or more course F in quarter 2 or semester 1, depending on whether you're looking at middle or high school. I also included the percent of students who had 2 or more Fs. So the way you'd read this graph, if we're looking at 7th grade as an example, 35% of all 7th graders had 1 or more F, 24% had 2 or more. So the difference between those numbers, that 11% had exactly 1, if you wanted to try to read how the numbers are placed here. There are a couple takeaways from this graph. One, you can see across the board that course failures were the highest in grades 7, 8, and 9. But you can also see that the percent of students with exactly 1 F, that gap between the bars, is fairly consistent. In other words, that difference between those bars, between the light blue and the dark blue, is consistently between that 8 and 11%. So the remaining would be those students with 2 or more course failures. Now, again, one of the questions that we could take a deep dive into, or deeper dive into, for quite a while is to look at, what causes course failures, what are the strongest factors, or what are some predictors of that. So I took the liberty of doing another logistic regression, and this is I hate to dare I say a quick summary, but the one highlight, the one takeaway from this entire graph or this entire table is this. If you look at chronic absenteeism and those blue numbers, okay, those are odds ratios. So what that tells us, where you see the 11, 11.23, the 11.38, the 13, what that tells you is students who are identified as chronically absent are 11 times more likely to have one or more course F compared to students who are not, okay? Now you see some other odds ratios that show up in some of these other groups like free and reduced, remote, in some of the other identified groups, but the one that just jumps out at all of us is that the big thing is you got to show up to class. And we know our teachers will bend over backwards for students to help them succeed in courses, but it's the chronic absenteeism that is a significant factor in course failures and whether or not students are succeeding in their courses. Proceeding on to NWA MAP growth results, we're seeing in those winter to winter growth trends some consistency with our prior fall to fall trends. In other words, this is that familiar graph we were looking at where we see gainers, maintainers, and sliders. On the left-hand side, those left-hand three bars are reading or language arts, and the right-hand side are trends in mathematics. In reading language arts, gainers, maintainers, and sliders are relatively consistent from one year to the next. We see a little drop off in the 2021 school year that we need to keep an eye on. In mathematics, the percent of sliders increased substantially while the percentage of gainers decreased. That is consistent with the fall-to-fall data that I shared several weeks ago. And this is grades 3 through 6, but grades 7, 8, and 9 follow that same pattern to the graph shown here. The data confirms that, especially in mathematics, the pandemic has limited our students' opportunities to learn and progress in some of their mathematics skills. So, this next graph looks at fall to winter terms. So the earlier one, this one was winter to winter, so it's over a 12-month time period. This is fall to winter for each of those years, so it's basically semester one learning. So the fall to winter growth trends are generally consistent across the 3 years shown, with some little bit of loss in the 2021 school year. We know this has been a tough year for many students and teachers. So in some ways, I looked at the fact that our fall to winter growth is at least somewhat stable. Some ways you can view it as a good sign because there's some stability in the data as we look across those years. However, the data does also suggest that student mastery in reading and mathematics may take several years to recover back to some of the pre-pandemic levels, because we really need to see some acceleration in these fall to winter and fall to spring growth patterns in order to start seeing some of the recovery. So, again, results in grades 7 and 8 and 9 follow a similar pattern to the graph shown here. So if I were to pull up those grade levels, it'd be more or less the same picture with similar conclusions. So I'm going to now introduce Dr. John McKinney, who will be providing a brief update on some of the data in the area of social and emotional well-being.
Thank you, Dr. Grumman. Thank you, Dr. Fulton, Dr. Hubbard, for allowing me to provide an overview of the Panorama Social Emotional Learning Survey. Social emotional learning is extremely important in the Shawnee Mission School District. SECD standards are a required part of the state's core curriculum. Social emotional standards are part of the district's KISA goals, and SEL standards are woven throughout the strategic plan, specifically in objectives 2 and 3. We've always known that social emotional learning is important and plays a significant role in the learning environment, but we never had a means of measuring it. Measuring SEL sends a message that we value these skills, and so we measure them in the same way that we measure academics. It also allows us to be proactive with regard to issues and concerns at the district, building, and individual student level. With SEL data, SIT teams can develop specific, targeted strategies to address building and district-wide issues around culture, student-teacher relationships, and more. Next slide, please. In November of this school year, students in grades 3 through 12 whose parents consented and allowed them to participate in the Panorama Social Emotional Learning Survey took the survey for the second time. For students in grades 9 through 12, this was their first time taking the survey. The survey asked questions in 2 areas. The first is student competency, which measures student self-management, growth, or grit and growth mindset. It asks questions around how do students perceive their own social, emotional skills. Examples include, how often do you stay focused on the same goal? Or if you fail, how likely is it that you'll try again? And responses are given on a Likert scale from almost never to sometimes to almost always. Here you can see the number of participants and a breakdown of the results in these categories. We have some work to do in the category of student competency, but also we have to take into consideration, the unique circumstances of this school year and the fact that at this stage we're still really collecting baseline data. The more we take the survey, the better we'll be able to see trends in these areas, and we can also see how participants in the survey compare to other students who have taken the Panorama survey across the nation. Next slide, please. The second set of questions measures student supports and environment. These measure teacher-student relationships and school climate. It asks questions around what sort of feedback do you have for your school? And examples include, if you walked into your class upset, how concerned would your teacher be? Or how excited would you be to have your teacher again next year? And the Likert scale varies from not at all to somewhat to extremely. Relatively positive results in these areas, again, given sort of the unique circumstances of this school year and also the fact that our secondary students in grades 9 through 12, this was the first time that they participated in the Panorama survey. Slide, please. And finally, secondary students in November were given the opportunity to answer 2 questions around diversity, inclusion, and equity. And this slide shows the results of those questions and demonstrates that while there is still work to do, with 1,639 students believing that their fellow students in school treated people from different races, ethnicities, or cultures somewhat, slightly, or not at all fairly, there is also work that we can be proud of, with 96% of secondary students indicating that adults in their school treated people from different races, ethnicities, or cultures somewhat, quite, or extremely fairly. With the board's support, we hope to continue to use the Panorama Social Emotional Learning Survey to inform not only our work around social emotional learning, but our diversity, inclusion, and equity work as well. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Grumman.
Right. Thank you, Dr. McKinney. The latest version of the Shawnee Mission School District Discipline Matrix was implemented beginning with the 2020-21 school year, so this school year. This version of and I believe Mr. Kramer introduced that, or I think maybe back in the spring, but this version of the discipline matrix associates levels of offenses with a range of leveled actions, so it's a much more clear system that we've put in place. So the purpose of the next 2 slides is not specifically to report on baseline discipline activity. This has been an unusual year, so we know that in-person discipline offenses will be much lower than normal. Our purpose here is, for these next 2 slides, is to highlight the fact that it does take a lot of work to get all staff on the same page with interpreting student behaviors and any actions that might be required in response to those behaviors. And these sample graphics can be used in concert with the discipline matrix to enhance our discussion and reflection. So it's really a model tool that we're going to be working with, because under the old system, this really wasn't possible, and this is something we're able to do now. So in this picture, moving left to right are the offenses in increasing order of severity. So on the leftmost, you have sort of lower level offenses like refusal to work or tardiness, or a student had an unauthorized object. And then moving to the right is your most serious offenses that you can kind of see in some of those descriptions. It might be hard to see on the screen up here. And then moving from the bottom to the top are the actions. So you have your less serious actions from the bottom, and then moving up to the top, you have your major level actions. So Now, keep in mind, single offenses can receive more than one disciplinary action, so you might still find some minor actions associated with some major offenses. So reviewing this data offers opportunities to validate the accuracy of the data. And so in this case, of course, we're just looking at the raw numbers, but if I go to the next, we look at percentages. So you would expect, for example, on the minor level offenses, 84% of all the minor level offenses are associated with what I would call minor level actions, right? And it then should follow that same pattern as you move over to the right, your more severe level offenses would be associated with your more severe level actions. Now, one of the things it does provide us with an opportunity to do is take this same picture and ensure that this picture not only looks like this for all students, but as we separate out or identify subgroups like Black students, Hispanic students, students with disabilities, that this picture looks the same. So that's what this provides us that opportunity to do. The other thing it does is it also provides us an opportunity with some data validation. So for example, right in the center of that graph, there's a little purple dot right in the center. And that one drew some attention to me because you have what I would call a mid-level offense that was tied to long-term suspensions. Okay, provides us with there's something, not quite right. So that provides us with an opportunity then to make sure that our data is correct and to ask questions like, was the offense coded correctly? Was the action coded correctly? Those kind of things. And I actually did contact the building administrators associated with that data point, and we did make some corrections. We found some things that were maybe miscoded in either direction. So it really highlights just a communication and reflection tool that we can use to, again, make sure that we're interpreting discipline actions and offenses in consistently across the district in the correct manner. So that concludes my whirlwind tour of the latest data available. Krista Carson, Coordinator of Curriculum and Instruction, will take it from here to provide an update on the learning teams tasked with creating recommendations for leveraging the ESSER funds to support student success.
Thank you, Dr. Grumman. Good evening. At this point, I'm going to share with you the process that the learning teams took to determine our recommendations that you have. In February, teams were created and they were formed with all educators from all disciplinary areas as well as all grade levels, elementary, middle, and high. And within those teams, the grade level teams, elementary, middle, and high, there were subgroups. And those subgroups focused on 4 different areas. One group focused on ELA, one focused on math, one focused on social emotional learning. And then the final group was another group that focused on, depending on the level, focused on electives, specialist, or on beyond the school day opportunities, as well as some student engagement opportunities. When those teams came together in March, they examined our current reality and the data that was provided to identify some areas for need. And with that, we followed and stayed within the parameters to determine our recommendations by making sure that they followed the parameters of the act that would allow us those funds. Then, within that, our recommendations came up. The examples that we came up with followed this framework. So we identified areas of need, and then we identified different options that would address those areas of need, while also adding the evidence that would support the effectiveness of those options that we came up with, and then gave a rough estimate or budget cost line for those items. As you can see in this example, and as it's been mentioned by Dr. Hubbard and Dr. Fulton and Dr. Grumman, as far as sticking with the course of our strategic plan, that was the beauty of this work, is that while we were addressing some unfinished learning or some learning loss, they also helped us expand and expedite some of the work that we're doing already. For instance, in this example here with the math intervention, that's work, math intervention. We have teams working on updating that work. And so then this option then just expanded that opportunity. As well as some of the options, we're starting that implementation this summer with kind of removing some of those barriers with programs that we already have existing, such as our summer enrichment program and our summer school opportunities to allow for more access to those opportunities. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Judd Remmers.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. One of the parts of this process was taking a look at our facilities and just keeping in mind cleanliness and repair as we've moved through this school year and into next. And sanitization of our buildings was of the utmost importance. And as remote learning was implemented last spring, operations and maintenance staff began preparing district facilities for what school was going to look like this year. And I'd absolutely like to take this moment to recognize their hard work and dedication as they continued to report to work throughout this time period. Because the district's cleaning program prior to the pandemic was structured to promote student and staff health, only a few additional disinfection measures had to be added to mitigate against COVID-19. This included nightly misting of classrooms and frequent cleaning of common touch points as the most significant additions to the custodial staff routines. To ensure we're providing a healthy learning environment across the district, multiple evaluations and inspections have been conducted in each building throughout the school year. And due to the hard work of the, of the custodial staff, I can confidently say that we have consistently met our goals for healthy learning environments. So with that, I'd like to kick it to Tyler Clubb for indoor air quality.
Thank you. So this information is from the American Society of Heating, Refrigeration, and Air Conditioning Engineers, or otherwise known as ASHRAE. They provide this chart to help explain what certain criteria pertains to increasing the quality of indoor air. This chart and language associated with it is referred with our consultants when conversations pertain to indoor air quality. For approximately 7 years, we've worked alongside Children's Mercy, and we do this to help better our indoor air quality conditions well before COVID. I want to touch base on how we're utilizing these new recommendations daily within our buildings to help with safe and healthy classrooms. So dilute for us what we are doing on each one of these dilute, exhaust, contain, and clean. Outside air dampers are open to a minimum of 30% open on all units when outside air conditions allow. This will allow us to achieve the 5 to 6 air exchange per hour that is recommended. Exhaust. Basically, if it's an exhaust and it's in our buildings, kitchens, restrooms, the main exhaust systems, they're occupied, they're running. Contain. So this is maintaining the humidity levels within the building. The ideal range that we want to achieve is 30 to 60% all year, winter, summer, fall, spring. Excuse me. Clean. This pertains to filter quality. So the units that were capable of it, we've installed MERV 13 filtration throughout the district. Those that were not, we have increased the filter quality from MERV 8 to MERV 11. Next slide. So in this slide is a chart showing the age and dollars needed to replace our current HVAC equipment, sorted in 5-year increments. What is circled in red is showing the projected amount of funding needed to replace current HVAC equipment over the next 5 years. This total is $35 million. If nothing is done in the next 5 years, that total will jump to $50 million. Currently, the funding dedicated to HVAC is done through bond, capital, and any other available sources like ESSER 2, ESSER 3. Next slide. So this slide is a breakdown showing a detailed budgeted line item for the next 2 years of what ESSER funds could potentially do for us. For those who cannot see this slide, I apologize, but an example, we will look at line 3 and how it's broke down. So line 3, Hawker Grove, what is it doing? So We will be going into the building, replacing all end-of-life life cycles to rooftop units and air handling units within the district. When could this potentially take place? May 2021. This project would cost $750,000. But what does it do for us for indoor air quality? Back to the original slide, and it could be the dilute exhaust contained. And that's where it circles back around and helps increase and give us the ideal indoor air quality that we want. And that concludes it, and I will be sending it back to Dr. Hubbard.
Thank you all. So just in summary, real quickly, you can see there was a lot of dedication with many stakeholders for this report, and a special thanks to Dr. Grumman for the data, because helping all of these teams make these decisions, the data was extremely helpful and sent them in the right direction from the beginning. So the other thing that I want to point out is that every team asked for more money than there are dollars available. So there are recommendations that just cannot happen. There's not enough ESSER money, even in 1, 2, and 3 combined, to even come close to the needs that are in this report. So as an executive leadership team, we narrowed down some of the recommendations, and then I am going to go through these line items just real quickly, because I think they're very important to be specific. So we dedicated elementary social workers of 7 that will now provide 1.0 to each building. For high school counselors, there actually will be 1 additional high school counselor in each building. However, one of them will be paid for out of the Kaufman funds. So as far as ESSER funds are into play, 4 will be allocated to ESSER funds. Reduced elementary class sizes at 3rd through 7th grade. 3rd through 6th grade to 25, and kindergarten through 2nd grade to 22. And that would take 18 teachers to be able to do that district-wide. One of the things in the report from the CARES teams was this year there's a building, at least 1 building sub in every building, and they really wanted to maintain that. They felt that that was extremely important. And so we have 54 allocated to that. That gives at least 1 per building, and then some buildings there would be more than 1 depending on size. Secondary math teachers, so this would put 1 math teacher in the 5 comprehensive middle schools, 5 comprehensive high schools. Horizons was staffed well enough that we didn't feel like we had to add there to give the support for their class sizes. So 10 math teachers, middle and high school. The elementary CARES team, the middle school CARES team, and the high school CARES teams would have an additional $675,000 to go back to work and say, okay, we have all of these options, now what are we going to spend our money on? So there could be additional personnel out of those dollars. However, most of them want a lot of resources, so I really anticipate the majority of that $675 will come from resources, because we had already given them several FTE that they had asked for in those reports. Indoor quality, the $2.3 million, and then 6.5 elementary instructional coaches. This would provide 1 full-time coach at every building now, because they don't have that now, and a 0.5 for pre-K. And then $450,000 for technology needs. All of these FTE that were added are going to need MacBooks. We're going to have to support them from a technology standpoint as well. Potentially some WebEx boards, types of things, so that we could collaborate, provide opportunities for kids in buildings that may not be able to take a course at one high school that is offered at another high school, credit recovery, those types of things. So we understand there's a lot of urgency around getting kids back to where they were. And as Dr. Fulton said, and Dr. Grumman, you heard that this is going to be a process. It's going to take time. We do understand the urgency. There are some things in this plan that would start pretty much immediately in regards to summer programming and scholarships for kids, that especially those high school kids that could be at risk of not graduating on time. So providing opportunities for them. Mr. Leday, who is the principal of summer school, reached out to Dr. Gilhus and I today, and he's really excited about this opportunity for kids and looking forward to really helping kids get back on track to graduate. And as you saw in the F data, the students receiving at least 1 or 2 Fs, we're going to have some kids that are going to be impacted and at risk for not graduating on time. So we definitely want to support those kids as we move forward with the urgency. With absenteeism, we're really hopeful that the social workers and counselors, reduction of elementary class size for people to be able to connect with kids more with just smaller numbers in general will help get kids in school, build those relationships, which we all know is the key oftentimes to getting kids to school, is that one person that can connect with them and make me want to come to school as that kid. So I want to be very clear. We've said this numerous times. We said it in the report. It's in writing here, but these positions will have to be reduced or absorbed in the 23-24 school year when the ESSER funds go away, not if, when the ESSER funds go away. So I can't reiterate that enough. It's going to be a really tough time at that time, I believe, as we've had these positions, and then they will be going away. But I think we have to keep that on the forefront as we move forward and getting kids back to where we need them, that all of these, this is what we would call soft money in the budgeting process, and they will have to be absorbed into the general fund or they will have to be reduced. Those are the two options when it comes to FTE in this plan. And then elementary class size would also return to the 24-27 or would have to be absorbed into the budget to maintain that for the future. I would ask team members, anybody, Joe, or I know you didn't really speak much, if I missed something, now's the time. Is there anything else we want to say in regards to this report? Again, a huge thanks to all the people that put time and effort into this report. It was a lot, but I think it was very well worth it, and I think will make a huge impact for mostly kids moving forward, but also on staff, which is very important. As we know, it's been a tough year for everybody. So with that, I think we will all stand for questions.
And before we start, first of all, thank you, everyone who's involved in this. I want to underscore something that Dr. Hubbard emphasized, and that is this. We have an opportunity in the next 3 years to make a big difference in the life of every child we serve. And these are resources that we can use in the way that we've described, not just for the first year, but for several years. But it is one-time money. It is going to go away. So just as we have an entry plan into providing supports for students, there needs to be an exit plan when this money is no longer available. Some of these priorities may be able to sustain, but not all of them. And that will have to be a function of the budgeting process going forward on what is and is not possible to continue. And I would suggest that's probably a good thing to keep on the forefront of everybody's mind over the next couple of years, so that we get 3 years down the road, people aren't surprised that some of the class sizes have to increase, or maybe some of the positions we were able to create, the extra teachers, have to go away. Well, that was by design, right? Because it's all one-time money. And then finally, I want to go back to what was talked about in the very beginning, and that is, it's easy to get lost in the weeds of all the data, but all the data bring us right back to those 3 objectives. Everything that was presented brings us right back to those 3 objectives, making sure that students are mastering those important competencies that get them back on track in mathematics. What are those competencies? The good thing is we can define what they are, and we can make sure that children learn them, so that if they are behind, if they've lost steam in their learning, or even if they went into the pandemic behind, we have a strategy to begin to address those needs. And this money is absolutely essential for us to meet children's academic and social emotional needs. It cannot be money that supplants the existing budget. It is needed on top of what we already get. And I can't underscore that enough. And the good thing is we can measure the impact over time. And over time is not 1 year, it's over the next 2 to 3 years. So with that, we're happy to respond to questions I know you'll have as board members.
So I'm actually going to kick off the questions before we move to any other board member, because I know that you're saying it cannot it cannot be supplanted. And I want to be clear for people who are listening at home and for everyone at the table today that that discussion is happening in Topeka with regards to the budget process for K through 12 funding in the state. And so that budget bill did not pass, it failed in the Senate, but what some of the proposals have been is to, rather than allow this to be money that we would use to put the necessary structures in place to get kids back to where they need to be, that there would then be equal cuts from state funding from whatever we would receive from the federal government, and that those state funding cuts would then have to be covered by this money, as opposed to being able to do these things. We would then be receiving basically the same amount of funding that we received last year. So we would be coming out a wash. If we want to do these things here that all of these teams have worked on to say this is what's necessary to get kids up to speed and back to where they need to be, we have to be able to spend these dollars on lowering class size so that they have more instruction time, getting instructional coaches in the buildings, hiring additional math teachers. This money was passed by the federal government to assist in getting kids back to where they need to be. So I just want to be clear, when we're talking about it being supplanted, that is a risk that is on the table right now. And this presentation is very useful for people who are watching that process at home to say, this is where that money is going to go. We have every dime allocated to meet the needs of students. We need those, well, we need more, we need the dimes. So it was very clear to me what you were saying, but it is possible that someone paying attention would not understand that this is a budgetary reality that's happening right now. That budget has not yet been passed in the legislature. When they come back for the veto session in 3 weeks, they will be debating this. And so now is absolutely the opportune time. We have a lovely delegation from Johnson County. We have a lovely delegation representing SMSD. If you would like to contact your representative and say, I saw this presentation at last night's board meeting, I will be contacting mine, and give them this information. It's very useful because it explains it may be soft money, but it has very specific intended purposes and we can't lose it. So that's my statement. It's not really a question, it's just a clarification. And so with that, I'll start with Ms. Borkman and then we'll work our way around.
Thank you so much to all of you presenters. You did a great job. I appreciate the transparency. Thank you for breaking down the budget. It's all very helpful information. As you mentioned, Dr. Grumman, the chronic absenteeism really just jumps off the page. I found the little disclaimer at the bottom of one of the charts. Students with chronic absenteeism are 11 times more likely to have at least one F than students who aren't chronically absent. So that chronic absenteeism really is a big factor. So this may be more of a question for Dr. Fulton. How are we addressing this chronic absenteeism? From what I understand, and I could be wrong, it's up to the building principal. Do we feel like that is enough? And if we aren't getting kids back, are we going to offer more support for these building principals or teachers to get our kids back in?
Well, I'd probably frame it this way. It's all of our responsibility to make sure that this happens. And I think part of what we're seeing in this budgeting process, which is really what this is a prioritization of resources around those supports that can help buildings do a more effective job of working with every student, whether that's adding social workers or counselors, adding math teachers, which will have the effect of lowering class sizes in math classes so that we can be more effective in reaching the needs of learners. All of those different strategies that we use make a big difference. At the end of the day, principals have a very heavy lift, don't they? Because they're working with all staff on helping to set direction on strategies that impact the learners that they serve. But at the end of the day, it's the responsibility of all of us as staff members in our respective roles to make sure that we're looking at the data, and in ways appropriate to our roles are supporting that work. So as a teacher, if I'm looking at this data and I'm in a professional learning community team, I'm going to be looking at who's chronically absent. Why are they chronically absent? What strategies do we have in place that are addressing the needs of that learner? And if those strategies aren't working, why? And what other strategies might be available to us to help reach out to the students? And I think that's always the challenge in this work is sometimes it feels like, we start big and we go down to the student level. In this case, if you're really going to impact chronic absenteeism, you start with the individual student. You understand the why and you work your way up, child by child. So that's the challenge of the work, and we serve a lot of students at a number of schools. So that's why it's so important that it's a team effort. But I think tonight is very much part about getting that dialogue going. I think the chronic absenteeism, that's a really important piece. And Dr. Grimm did a wonderful job of telling the story through the data. But that data is pretty well known out there. I mean, if you're not there 90% of the time in school, then you begin to see those failure rates really jump up. And that's not just true of Shawnee Mission. You see this data playing out nationally. So if we know that, and we know who's chronically absent, then we should have interventions in place that are addressing the needs of those students. And where we have holes that are hard to fill, like we just can't reach them, and we're not able to do it with the staff we have, then you have to start to get creative and ask, who else might we be able to bring on to help us in this team effort? So I know Dr. Hubbard looks like she's getting ready to jump in. So
yeah, I would add in regards to it ultimately being a building principal is it's a tough job, right? But one thing that we do, the leadership and learning team, when we meet with principals weekly, is provide sort of a principal PLC time where we look at data. I mean, we do data dives regularly, whether it be around absenteeism or behavior or MAP scores, whatever it may be. And we pair them in all sorts of different ways. Sometimes it's like data. I mean, you might have the three of us might have schools that look very similar in regards to our data, while the next three look very different. And so sometimes it's by like data, sometimes it's by feeder pattern. We have feeder patterns that perform differently than other feeder patterns. And so we do a lot of time doing data dives with principals, and then where they can brainstorm with their peers, because an elementary principals are a really lonely job sometimes. You're there by yourself, and so really trying to be able to talk to their peers about just ideas around absenteeism or increasing math scores. So there is that piece as well in regards to supporting buildings.
Okay, that's great. And I look forward to hearing creative ways and ideas, because I know that, the old quote, if you do what you've always done, you'll get what you've always gotten, So I know that, we'll be looking at creative ways to really address this issue and get kids in seats. So thank you.
Thank you for this presentation. And those of you watching at home, on Board Docs, there's also a 99-page document that goes into much greater detail and includes all of the names of the teachers and administrators and social workers and everybody who participated in this, and lots of details about exact programs and training and things that they've identified that would be the most helpful. So thank you for all of that work. It's incredible. What impressed me so much about it is that even though this is a short-term, immediate, urgent problem that we want to address to get all of our students back to where they need to be, some of these things are going to pay off dividends down the road, because we're going to train lots of teachers in lots of different things that they'll, of course, then be able to use moving forward. So I'm very excited about how it's spread out among building maintenance and teaching resources and social emotional skill resources, and I think it's just covers a broad spectrum, and so I'm very impressed with that whole document. I do share the concerns that Dr. Hubbard and Dr. Fulton mentioned, that getting these extra teachers especially, and social workers in the buildings is going to be so wonderful, but 3 years from now it's going to seem normal. And we know that there's going to be new families that move into the district, and families with young children who aren't students yet, but who will be. So I just wondered, I guess, Dr. Hubbard, you're the one I need to see, what are some ideas that we can keep that in the forefront so that people aren't caught off guard in 2 or 3 years when we do have to say, now you know that these teachers were just temporary, these social workers are temporary. What can we do as a board, as a community to keep that in the forefront of everyone's mind?
You know, we've had a lot of discussion about that as the executive leadership team, and so I'll ask anyone else to chime in as well, but we talked about how important it's going to be at negotiations to talk very specifically about that. In board presentations as things come up, you know, program evaluations when we talk about that, to say, just a reminder that these positions are here with ESSER dollars. So I think just continuing to keep it out there on the forefront, even with our principals when they're like, oh, this is great. It is great, but remember, this is temporary, and this is, you know, it's an intervention phase right now, but it will be phasing out. So I think keeping it on the forefront and being very honest about it up front, which is why we put it in a chart. I wanted to make it very clear by saying it, not just looking for somebody to look for the fine print, right? So we just need to keep it very, very public as we move forward. And Dr. Atha, Dr. Fulton, I know we've had a lot of discussion about this, so anything you would like to add, please do.
Yeah, I tell you, it's, I echo what Dr. Hubbard just said, because it's going to be important over the next 3 years to keep repeating that message. Just as we talk about our destination, we know what our objectives are. That's what we're aiming for. We're going to learn a lot over the next 3 years about how to deploy these resources in ways that will help us to achieve those 3 objectives. But we'll also have to be thinking about when we no longer have some of these resources, how are we going to get to the same results, but differently? Because we won't have, perhaps, some of the lower class sizes that we're accustomed to now. They'll go back up. Nobody wants that, but it's going to happen, as one example. So just keep it in the forefront of everybody's mind, and then, as we're doing tonight, use the data to tell the story so that the resources get deployed in the most strategic ways possible. And you know, it's a little bit of a tragedy that we don't have some of these resources in place right now. I'm glad we're going to get them in place for the next 2 to 3 years. I wish there was a way to maintain that. There's the tragedy, but you know, we're thankful for the fact that we have 2 to 3 years where we can do some things that we've wanted to do for a long time anyway. Dr. Atha?
I think too, and you've alluded to this, Dr. Fulton, and you, Dr. Hubbard, as well. I think it's important with the extra things that we will be doing to support our kids, that we continue to collect that data to see if the things that we've got in place are making a difference with kids. And then as we lose the funding, then also create priorities of, gosh, we really need to keep such and such, because it's really making a difference for kids. And that's really a priority to us. How can we fund that? How can we sustain that? And look at that. And everything that was presented tonight aligns with the strategic planning and strategic planning process. But I think to continue to collect data, continue to prioritize, will help as you back out of this when the funding is no longer available.
If I can add just one thing, I think it's important to state that, you know, Dr. Hubbard did a nice job of saying that these positions would need to be reduced or absorbed. We don't know what 2 or 3 years is going to look like. And so as a HR guy, you know, I would hope that we would find ways to assess this data and find ways to keep some of these positions. And I also think it's important to say publicly, you know, we're out there actively recruiting right now, that we didn't delineate these positions as different than any others. And so kind of the back out in 3 to 4 years would hopefully through attrition, we would be able to keep the people that still want to be a part of our district. So it's not like we've delineated that this position is different than any other positions. And so that's kind of the strategic effort looking down the road.
Thank you. Thank you for the data. I guess my question is going to be focused on the middle school experience. And I was thinking about that word experience because all of our families and students have had an experience, and they've been varied. So your K through 6 folks have had a different experience than your 7 and 8s versus your high school. So I'm thinking about the middle schoolers, and so an 8th grader today, had the 7th grade experience that basically went August through March, and then we went remote. And then the 8th grader has been remote up until last month. And then I'm thinking about the incoming 6th graders, and then the 8th graders moving out. So I'm thinking about those folks because change is hard, and then they've had a lot of hard change. And so I was wondering, could you remind me where some of the focus is going to be for those folks that are moving through that really tricky middle school period, because it's so darn hard to navigate in normal conditions and then during this pandemic?
Well, I'll start it off. One of them clearly is spelled out with the addition of 10 math teachers, one at each middle school and one at each high school. There are going to be a lot of competencies that the students will have mastered. But there'll also be competencies, important underlying competencies, understandings in mathematics that they missed, some of them. We need to understand, who's on track, who's struggling. The NWA map data help with that. And then be able to put interventions in place that really make sure that students are, in fact, mastering those important competencies that are foundational to future learning. Because if they try to go on to higher level classes and they're missing those competencies, they're going to be lost. So we have to figure that out. And the addition of some math teachers will help with that. So I'll kick it off with that comment and then pass it on to other team members.
Brad, I'd say I spoke to more middle school parents over this past year than any other group. We have twice as many high school students and parents than we do middle school, but no loss for a lot of frustrated, feeling lost parents over the past year. I think, alluding to what Dr. Fulton just said, we've got to find out when they go into high school and meet them right where they're at, and we're probably going to have some reteaching. I think our high schools are going to have to be extra sensitive with those 8th graders coming in and make some allotments for them. Social emotional will be key, and I think we just got to track them a little bit closer. But they're aware of it. I think it's just a question of putting it in place when they get up to the high school level, and being very cognizant of it.
I would also add those middle school CARES dollars. We gave $675,000 to each elementary, middle, and high. And if you do a per pupil of that, it's a very large amount for middle school than it is for the elementary or high. In this chart that we show, it does, they've heard me say this before, but it looks very focused on elementary, reducing class size, instructional coaches, and social workers, and then you get the high school, we get math teachers, and we get counselors and these things, and it does look like the middle level is short there a little bit, but that middle school CARES team will go back with that $675,000 and identify now of this money what is most important for us. Subs is also, that's a big, it has been exceptionally popular this year for all levels, but at the middle level, I know it's helped them get PLC time that they desperately would like to have. And
so I wanted to just reflect on, as a board member, my level of confidence in thinking about how we're going to allocate these resources in the next 3 years is extremely high, and I want to thank you all for that. Beginning with the fact that, you started with a data-informed position and looking at how our students are doing and how they're feeling and thinking and connecting. And then tying that so closely to the strategic plan, not only, that we adopted as a board, but how that's fitting in with the KISA requirements as well. And then developing very personalized approach within our district by all of our professional educators who are so close to all our students in those buildings at all 3 levels, and really thinking about where are our strengths, where do we have our holes, where are our needs, where do we need to build on that. So using that expertise of our educators, and then weaving into that plan, looking at the evidence-based practices. Each request for dollars has been rolled forward through the district administration. So having that evidence-based piece and that budget along with it to think about how the feasibility of all that. So just as a board member, I just wanted to acknowledge that that really makes me feel incredibly confident about how we're going to be able to move forward with the next 3 years in meeting the needs of these kids whose learning was interrupted through the global pandemic. So thank you. That's just an amazing amount of work that's gone into this report. And the other piece of just really seeing how the data is evolving and the metrics that will be, I assume, continue to roll out with our strategic plan. Each time you all come to the table with this, I feel like there's just that much stronger sense of what these metrics are. Even when I think about the discipline metric, how much work you all put into getting clarity around that and adopting that, across the district and really clarifying that, and then seeing how we can make sense of it in these graphics. It's really powerful. So I would just wanted to acknowledge that. And then, so my question is kind of linked to the chronic absenteeism and identifying these at-risk kids. And one of the other threads I think about in the legislature, one of the big conversations is how are districts using at-risk dollars and what are those evidence-based practices that we're starting from. And so my understanding is that just part of that is really revolves around the RTI and the MMTS. Is that kind of two pieces of those evidence-based practices along, of how we're identifying who's at risk? Maybe could you speak to that a little bit? Because I think it's hard to understand who these at-risk kids are because they change, right? They're not, a static group of individuals, but, so I don't know if you could speak a little bit to that.
I don't see, we don't have Russ, right? Russ is not here. So I can't speak specifically to how at-risk dollars are allocated.
I'm just talking more about how are we identifying those kids who are at risk.
Oh, okay.
And working with them in the building and so.
I can speak a little bit to that. As far as the thinking behind our evidence-based practices, you're absolutely right around the RTI process and the MTSS process as far as having those universal screeners that we already have in place, but then building our teams, our PLC teams. And that's why I think the sub request was so popular, is to give those teams that time to really analyze their universal screener data, to be able to then make a plan to intervene with those students. That was what I heard in my teams being important and being necessary. So yes, that RTI process is part of that.
The toughest part about the absenteeism, especially the chronic, is that they're not showing up, so we can't put the interventions in place. And so that's just a secular process that doesn't end. And so if students are failing and slipping through the cracks and they're showing up each day, we have an opportunity to be successful with them. But when we can't get a hold of the students that are chronically absent, we can't make contact with the parents, we're pulling our hair out and trying to get them in is our biggest problem. It was made reference to starting off with those relationships. If we've got 1 or 2 staff members that have that relationship that can get them to the front door, and then if we can give them some sort of success in the building, then they're going to be a little bit more excited about coming to school. Maybe we can tie them in with an activity or a club. So there's all kind of different things you can put in play to get them here, but we've got to get them here. And over this past year, we've had a lot of students that have gone to work and started making money, and they need that money for their families. And so trying to get them back. So how can we tie in work programs with getting an education and correlating that with our curriculum to give them success and get them a high school diploma? So that's even going further outside of the box. So the chronic absenteeism is a huge hurdle.
We do have some very specific indicators that we look at. One, to pull data, but more importantly, when we're working with kids. But I think this is where this really comes back to those 3 objectives in the strategic plan and why a personalized learning plan is so very important, because every kid is going to have some sort of at-risk factor, regardless of what it is. I mean, even your best and brightest kid, still every kid has that one, I hate to use the word indicator, but the one thing that keeps them from going to the next level. And so I think that's, this personalized learning plan and really meeting kids where they are and the youth science work we're doing through Kaufman and the real world learning work we're doing, and we're doing a pilot program in the elementary schools. We'll be talking more about that with the Kaufman program, or the Kaufman grant. I just think that personalized learning plan and being able to know what makes each individual kid, to connect. And we have to be able to connect with each individual kid to get them to school and to find out what drives them.
Just to Joe's point, those relationships are extending beyond students now and going to the families as well. We're spending a lot of time reaching out to the families and asking them for their input on either the student situation or the family situation and attempting to address that as well.
Thank you all. This was my favorite report so far ever to read.
It's all the
As you can tell by all my
acronyms.
questions. Yeah, it is so good. It's so fun.
So this is including SR2 funds, and there's a third round of funding that is not yet included in this, correct?
There is the ESSER $3 that we're hopeful for, yes, but if we're going to sustain this, the same plan would carry through for the ESSER.
And that's why we're able to say it would go the 3 years and not the one, because we are talking about, that is something that we know is on the table. It's not definite, but we are saying we're going to be able to sustain this for 3 years based on the fact that there are ESSER $3.
Absolutely, great point.
And so then the next thing I'll say or comment on the elementary social workers, those 7 elementary social workers and the 4 high school counselors, in my mind, have been desperately needed since before I came to sit on this board. I know that was something that Lori, Mary, and I heard about back in 2017, was that it doesn't matter what building you're in, having a social worker there on a full-time basis, as opposed, because we have buildings splitting social workers right now, that whether or not you have a building that has, is fortunate enough to have financial wealth or not have financial wealth, there are children in those buildings that have hardships, be it, a loss of a family member or stress from something else, that having that social worker there greatly benefits all those kids. So in my mind, especially when we're talking about chronic absenteeism and we're talking about somebody contacting families or, talking to a student and finding out where that student's at and emotionally, or what's going on that might be preventing them from being there. So I am very much excited about the 7 social workers and the 4 high school counselors. And when we talk about potentially losing those in 22 or 23, even if we are able to accomplish what we need to accomplish to get our kids academically back to where they need to be, this need was there prior to the pandemic, and this need will continue after the pandemic. Small class sizes, that need has been there that whole time as well. So whatever we can do as we move forward to think about how to structure to keep them. If we have a kid who has to work to help buy groceries, that high school counselor is going to be the person that helps identify that. These are vital. We don't get to the academics if we don't meet those core fundamentals. Just as Dr. Fulton was saying, if a child doesn't have a full belly, the child isn't going to learn. If a child is worried about getting kicked out or their family becoming homeless, then my priorities would align with going to work too, if that was the situation I was in. So I want to make sure in the forefront, when we have these presentations over the next few years, when whoever's sitting at this dais gets this information, this is going to go away. We need to just this goes away if we don't figure out a way to make it stick. Because I think it would be really hard to lose them again. When we lost them the first time back in, was that 10 years ago? It was a big deal when we lost him then. Was it 2012? Okay. Sorry, now I'm on a rant. How do we not have that happen? We need them.
Well, it's going to come through the budget prioritization process, and that is one thing we spent a lot of time on. Not just in this process, but think about what we've done the last couple of years. We were able to we're able to now have comparability with other Johnson County school districts at the secondary level because we are moving to having 5 out of 7. That was an important step forward that actually is going to help the cause of addressing the academic needs of our students. So hopefully we do a even more effective job of ensuring that students are learning what they need for their future success. So that's one. But the second piece here is, as we looked at our Johnson County peers, there's no question at the high school level that we were short counselors. This brings us up to comparability with our Johnson County peers. So, you know, when you look at something like failure rates and college access, all of that matters. Now, you have to use your resources effectively. You have to use your time effectively. But you can measure that, what the impact is on learning, whether it's college and career readiness or growth toward grade level expectations in math or ELA. All of that's measurable, student by student. But this absolutely just begins to simply make us whole. As I've heard this board say before many times, this simply makes us whole from where we used to be. So I think that's a really important piece to emphasize to everyone. This money matters. And these resources are going to help.
Ms. Goodburn.
Well, you actually stole my question.
Oh,
but that's
I
okay.
apologize.
So it's okay then. So the ESSER 2 ends, when do we have to expend those funds by?
Dr. Atha, do you know the answer to that?
It's September next year.
Okay, so then the ESSER 3 money, we're basically, to get to 23-24, we're using that, and we don't even know what that amount is yet, but we're assuming it's going to be more.
We have a projected amount, and we believe it will be almost double. So that would give us the 21, 22, 22, 23.
And we'll have to then to be able to spend. Okay,
So
that
we'll be up to 24, September 24.
ESSER 3.
That's our goal, but we're hopeful. And that all assumes that we get the full amount and that the state doesn't supplant that money.
I understand that, yes.
Yep.
And thank you for this report. You had a very short time to put it together. I think February, March timeframe, and with that, getting that many people together, working on this, kudos to you for the work that the report was. I agree with Dr. Sinclair. It's one of the best we've seen. So a 99-page report. It was a joy to read it. Thank you.
Ms. Embry.
Yeah, I would reiterate how fantastic the report was. I really loved the process that we took to arrive at this. I would echo that it just gives me a very high degree of confidence as a board member to look at this list of 96 people who came together to review so much data and arrive at really thoughtful recommendations. I just feel a really high degree of confidence in not only what you've recommended here, but what I know these teams will continue recommending. So thank you for that. I especially want to highlight and thank you for disaggregating data by race and ethnicity. I want us to be extra sensitive to the fact that the way this pandemic is affecting students varies depending on who the student is. So I appreciate that we're building that into all of our reports to really disaggregate wherever we can on race and ethnicity and free and reduced lunch and ELL learners, so we can be extra sensitive to that. My specific question is actually about our youngest kids. This is the week of the young child, and I know when it comes to sort of pre-K through 2, they're not taking panorama tests, they're not getting F's and A's and B's, they're not taking MAP tests. So when we think about the effectiveness of these dollars for our youngest students who are, you know, that's the age where they're learning to read, they're learning to stand in line, they're learning to work with peers. Like I worry so much about our youngest kids who aren't always able to tell us how they're doing. How will we think about them moving forward?
So our K2 are taking the primary map, so we at least do have that data for them. In addition, I'm going to toss to Krista to talk a little bit about the assessments we're using with the 95% group and the Dibbles work. If you would, please.
Yes, so again, it kind of falls into that RTI process we have requested for those resources to continue with the 95% group with the foundational skills. They measure those foundational skills for our students, as well as our Acadience assessment will measure and show us how we are performing at those lowest levels of reading specifically. And then in my elementary team, I know that they worked, we had pre-K representation as well in that, and so the recommendations do fit with what they requested as well, and then that social emotional learning piece was also addressed in our elementary component. Thank you.
So just to tack onto that, at the pre-K level, all students are screened at least twice a year with an assessment called the MyAGDs, which is measures pre-literacy skills, if I'm saying it correctly, and then the Acadience or Dibbles measures, kindergarten through 6 actually are screened 3 times a year on that set of measures. So some of the additional components that we're needing to fill some gaps are really in those diagnostic pieces of, we're actually pretty good at screening students, identifying students who, are at risk, but then the next step is then what do you do as the sort of the follow-up pieces of then really being able to target, specifically what math skills or what literacy skills and then making sure that you're matching with the right type of intervention with the skills that are being identified. So it's that second layer that I think we're, wanting to shore up in those spaces and making sure that those things are, readily available to teachers. They're easy to access and efficient, because sometimes you can have, lots of tools out there, but they have to be easy to get to for staff members and easy to, sort of do in a short amount of time, given the time our teachers do have. So we have to make sure that those things are readily available kind of in an efficient manner, so we're not having to pass materials around to buildings all the time or having to, share between classrooms. If we have those things readily available to all teachers, it's going to make that process go much more smoothly.
I would also add that we have curriculum-based measures at every grade level, from early childhood through seniors in high school, that our curriculum cadres have created that align with our curriculum maps. So local common assessments. We have a software called Performance Matters. It has a data bank that we have used to create some of those local common assessments. And I would tell you there right now that we are much further along pre-K-6, and we're still working at the secondary level, but we definitely are much further along at that early pre-K-6 level, so using those measures as well.
Great, thank you.
It looks like we have a couple board members with a couple more questions, so we'll go ahead and go around again. Ms. Borgman?
Yeah, just one additional question. I really appreciate all of the discussion about the chronic absenteeism. Obviously, that's going to be a huge thing for us in the fall. And it was really great hearing from so many of you really talking about how we're trying to meet students. And so maybe, I don't know, and as it gets closer to the fall, maybe we could take a deeper dive at another workshop or something into how the district is addressing that moving forward, because I think you guys have some great suggestions and ideas, and I think it would be, interesting to hear more about that as we move into the fall school year. So obviously not all of Shawnee Mission is at home watching this meeting, and I have talked to a lot of moms who are just really upset and frustrated and mad and all the things about how their child has done this school year. And, what is our communication plan to let parents know, to let caregivers know that help is coming, that help is on the way?
Well, I think part of it is what we do as a follow-up to this meeting with the summary that's provided to parents. But this is going to have to be an ongoing topic of conversation the next 3 years. Through the program evaluation process, workshops like these, I think that's the way that you begin to address issues that are tied into our strategic plan and the metrics that go with that. And I'd invite Dr. Hubbard or anybody else to join in on that response.
I hope they can see as soon as this summer, when we look at some possible scholarships for students that have fallen through the cracks or may be at risk or failing. And so those might be some immediate opportunities for kids, and we would be looking at providing providing funding to each one of the schools, because Mr. Leday, who oversees the summer school program, he wouldn't know who those at-risk kids are at the other buildings. And so we would look at a way to fairly and equitably distribute the money, determine how much money we're going to look at for scholarships, and then those counselors, social workers, administrators, teachers, maybe identify that, work with those kids. And I think that's an opportunity that they'll see immediately or very soon with some of this money working for them.
Thank you. Elementary class size will be an immediate, I mean, that's just going to be an immediately win, right?
Yep.
Thank you, Reverend Guy. Mr. Stratton? Okay, Dr. Sinclair?
I just wanted to follow up on the building subs. So that, I've heard a lot of positive feedback too about the building subs. And so that looks like something that we've had 2 in elementary and 4 at the high school level. And so we're going to commit to sustaining at least 1 in every building. Is that correct? And it's possible some might use some of those care team dollars to add additional. How is that? Is that,
Yeah.
am I reading that right?
Absolutely. So this year, we've supported elementaries with 2 each, elementaries with 3, and then the high schools with 4. And just so everyone knows, we've also had a building sub district funded through general FTE at all of our high schools previously to this year as well. So yes, we have budgeted 54, I think, so that would at least get us 1 at each of the buildings with a little bit of give, where we can do maybe some floating subs, something like that. Actually not floating, but some dedicated to the middle school, and then kind of go between buildings or things like that. So, yeah, we love the program. We've got some great feedback with it and want to continue it for sure.
Great, thank
Yeah,
you.
we spent a lot of time thinking about, time matters, right? And how you're able to use time in your workday makes a difference, and your ability to focus on some of the at-risk students that you're trying to serve, or really all students that you're trying to serve. And so those subs are going to give us an opportunity to provide time to teachers to get involved in their professional learning communities, or PLCs, to do response to intervention that we've been talking about, and to really think about what are the instructional strategies that I need to engage in that will make the biggest difference for all the learners I serve as universal, but very specifically for those that need more targeted interventions. And not just me as an individual teacher, but us as grade level teachers, or vertically, as we work with students who, maybe I may be a 3rd grader chronologically, but I'm working at the 2nd or 1st grade level. What is that going to look like for me as a learner to help me accelerate in the growth of my learning, so I'm on grade level when I get to high school? I'm not falling behind 1 year after, more 1 year after another. So those are 3 years is not a lot of time, but it's better than no years. And it's going to help make a difference.
Thank you.
Ms. Goodburn?
Really quickly thought about, in looking at this hiring secondary math teachers, they aren't always that easy to hire. So, math and science teachers at the secondary level. So how confident are you that we're going to be able to find those teachers out there?
Really confident, actually. We started on the process 2 or 3 weeks ago once we started on this plan. And so we were very fortunate that we already had some early hires in play. We already had some leads on some potential pool candidates already. We posted those pool positions, so we jumped on it immediately. Started pushing potential candidates out to the high schools and middle schools, and so we're well down the road. So some pre-planning is serving us well. Yep.
Ms. Embry?
I was going to ask, I have loved so much of our communications around the bond. Is there a way to do something like that with all of this ESSER funding, so we can help people kind of keep track of what all of the components are that we're putting in place in response to ESSER, and when they will start, and more importantly, when they will end, like a way to really keep that out in the forefront for folks, because I do think these are incredible recommendations, and I want the community to know that they're coming, and also that they're potentially going.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it ends up being, we focus on the work, because it isn't really about the money, it's about the work, but we absolutely will be doing that.
I'm not seeing any further questions at this time. So I want to thank the team for presenting. It's very appreciated. You guys are doing yeoman's work, and our kids are lucky to have you. And we are, as a board, lucky to have you. And I'll turn it over to you for any final comments, Dr. Fulton, before we move on to the consent agenda.
Well, I want to thank the board for taking time to go through this report with us, and there's no action needed tonight. The action really takes place when the budget is developed for next year, and then in the future, any items that might be required under the normal consent agenda or action items in future board meetings. But this is really informational at this point.
And the budget presentation is in May. Is that correct? Go over the budget in May?
May 17th.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Atha. Okay, so we have a few items on our consent agenda this evening. I'll seek a motion for approval of the consent items.
Move approval?
Thank you, Dr. Sinclair. Is there a
Second,
second?
Goodburn.
Hearing no calls to remove anything from the consent agenda, I will go ahead and hear aye from those who will vote aye.
Aye.
Are there any nays? Okay, that passes unanimously. Thank you. And then we will move on to comments from board members. We'll start with Ms. Embry. We started on the other side twice this evening.
I don't have anything to add. Thank you.
Thank you. Ms.
Nothing
Goodburn?
for me.
Nothing for me either.
Yep, thank you. Thank you.
No comments tonight, thanks.
Okay, I'll keep up the trend here. I'll save, I was going to talk about the NSBA conference, but I'll wait for my board report at our next board meeting.
Thank you.
Just a shout out to all of you guys. Thank you so much. Excellent job tonight. Thank you.
Thank you. That concludes our meeting. Thank you, everyone.